In the previous video, I talked about deterrence and coercion and began to get into some of the ways in which they can be tricky or dangerous policies, but I really want to expand on that now. Because, in fact, we don't see states running around all the time making deterrent and coercive threats, even though, right, you would think they ought to be pretty potent levers to change others' behavior. But these threats are usually left implied because really making threats creates as many problems for those making them as for those receiving them, and that's what I want to focus on here. First of all, why is it that deterrent and coercive threats fail? So in many cases, the actor's will is doubted, right? I've used this example a million times now, right? Germany did not think England would intervene in World War I. Japan thought that when it bombed Pearl Harbor in World War II, that the United States would simply withdraw to the west coast of the United States and leave the Pacific open to the Japanese Navy, and instead the United States resolved that it was going to fight Japan all the way to unconditional surrender. In Syria in 2015, the Syrian government doubted U.S. will to intervene when Syria used chemical weapons, and actually they were right to do so. The United States ultimately decided it didn't want to get involved. So that threat failed, and to the extent it was a bluff, the bluff was called. But capability can also be doubted. For example, Iraq in 1991, when the United States was threatening to invade and its allies, Iraq promised what Saddam Hussein called the mother of all wars, and talked about all the hardware they had and yada, yada, yada. And essentially, the United States did not regard that as a very serious threat, didn't regard it as a serious threat because they had done their own military analysis. And in fact, the U.S. military was able to defeat the Iraqi military fairly quickly. The same thing was true again in 2003, right? So Saddam Hussein's threats simply weren't credible because the capability to fulfill them clearly was not there. But in some important cases, threats are not communicated effectively, and it's often much more difficult to communicate effectively, especially with adversaries, than we think. So two great examples of this are, dang it, sorry, wrong slide. There it is. In 1950, the U.S. was willing to go to war in Korea, which we did. But the U.S. wouldn't have had to go to war in Korea had it more effectively committed its willingness to do so. But there was a famous couple of speeches actually given by the Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, in which he talked about the extent of U.S. military commitments around the world. And he was trying to make a very forceful statement about U.S. Commitments, but in describing the commitments, he talked about Japan but said nothing about the Korean Peninsula. And so what North Korea and China and the Soviet Union heard was, okay, the United States is not committed to Korea. So since that threat was not committed effectively, we ended up fighting a war that we might have avoided had we said, yes, we will go to war for South Korea. Similarly, before Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, there was this subsequently famous meeting between Saddam Hussein and the U.S. ambassador, a woman named April Glaspie. And Saddam was complaining about Kuwait was doing this, that, and the other. And the U.S. ambassador basically said, as far as we're concerned, that's between you and them. And I think what she meant to imply was, we're not going to get involved in resolving this conflict. What Saddam Hussein heard was, the U.S. says it's not getting involved, so I can go ahead and attack. So again, had the U.S. said more clearly, hands off Kuwait, we'll fight over this, maybe that entire war could have been avoided, right? So, but it's hard for people to be deterred or coerced when they don't even understand that they're being deterred or coerced. Other reasons why it might fail is that your threat might not raise the stakes high enough. And the great example of this, of course, was U.S. strategy in Vietnam. When the U.S. first got involved in Vietnam, there was a small number of troops, small number of advisors, and the idea was simply to inflict enough pain on the North Vietnamese that the North Vietnamese would say, you know what, we'll just stick to North Vietnam and not worry about South Vietnam. And as time went on, there was what was called carpet bombing, meaning just saturating whole areas with bombs and keeping track of body counts. Again, the idea being that as we killed more and more North Vietnamese soldiers, and frankly a fair number of civilians as well, North Vietnam would simply say it's not worth it. And the United States simply dramatically underestimated the level of cost that the North was willing to bear in order to get the United States out of South Vietnam and then to overtake the South Vietnamese government. Such that North Vietnam ended up losing about 1.1 million soldiers in that conflict. In the U.S., about 58,000, but the U.S. found that intolerable before North Vietnam did. So because there was a misunderstanding of the costs that the other side was willing to bear, the deterrent or coercive threat simply couldn't work. So that case is a good one where to sort of highlight that all of this coercion and deterrence is about manipulating the costs of others, right? And so it assumes that the other side is, not only is the other side is rational, that it has a very rational notion of costs, benefits, and so on, but that our side has an accurate understanding of their costs and benefits and their rationality. So the Vietnam case is a good example. I'm not going to say that the North Vietnamese leadership was irrational, but simply that what was rational to them was not rational to us. And so we embarked on a set of policies that made sense to us, but were never really going to come close to having the results that we anticipated. So the presumption of rationality places a high bar on coercion and deterrence. Moreover, credibility eventually can become a trap, right? So credibility is essential to the success of coercion and deterrence. What that means is that anything that undermines your credibility becomes a danger, not only now, but in the future. And so that can turn a small problem into a big one. So you might make a threat about something that's not that important to you. And if the other side tells you to shove off, the problem you now face is, wait a second, I don't really care about this particular problem, but I've made a threat, and if I don't follow through, I'm going to lose my I'm going to lose credibility. And then the next threat, right, won't work very well. So what that tends to do is to turn small problems into big ones, because now you might be expending a lot of energy over something that wasn't that important to you in the first place. So a good example of this thinking was the domino theory in Vietnam. A lot of people have argued that in the grand scheme of things, Vietnam was not that important to the United States. The belief at the time, though, was that if we didn't follow through on what we set out to do in Vietnam, our credibility would be questioned elsewhere, and there would be this whole other series of consequences. And so essentially, it made Vietnam much more important than it really was, and therefore made the U.S. willing to bear much higher costs than it otherwise would have been. It becomes very hard to make concessions when you're not only concerned about the current case, but about the effect on future credibility. And that's the respect in which threats then can become traps, because bargaining is partly about making concessions, but once you've made explicit threats, concessions seem to undermine your credibility. And so it becomes a trap. So one of the things that research on this has pointed to is what's called the spiral model, right? Which is that we tend to think if we make a threat, we're kind of making the last move in the game. And the point that the spiral model makes is that there's always another move that can be made. So your threat is met by a counter threat, raising the stakes. You make a counter to the counter threat, raising the stakes again, right? Anybody who's played a game of poker knows how this goes. You end up sometimes throwing a whole ton of money in the pot over a hand that might not be that great, or even if it's a decent hand, it's just not that important to you, because once you have put a certain amount of money in, it seems to throw in a little bit more, right? So the stakes can then get much higher than the original issue was worth, right? And again, to get back to this credibility problem, the higher the stakes go, the more your credibility is at stake if you back down, and so you can't back down. So it's another way in which threats and cycles of threats seem to trap actors in dynamics that they don't really feel like they can find a way out So that's why coercion and deterrence are sometimes dangerous, and we'll talk more going forward about some of the other ways in which actors try to use force to achieve their goals.